When you think about businesses like Allbirds or Skims that are selling through the roof, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But what's often overlooked is the business behind the business that makes it all possible. For millions of businesses, that's Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. With Shop Pay, you can boost conversions by up to 50%, meaning fewer abandoned carts and way more sales. Whether your customers are scrolling online, strolling through your store, or browsing social media, Shopify ensures you're ready to sell wherever they are. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow, grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/DAX, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/DAX to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/DAX.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting through my website, emailrevealer.com. You can just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. The archives are free. You go to Spreaker.com. If you go there to Spreaker in our archives, you can look up Gordon Woods' Celtic Boys Club. You'll find I've done 2 previous interviews with our guests today, but finally we have some good news. Gordon Woods was one of the survivors of the abuse that went on at the Celtic Boys Club, and there was just some recent criminal charges, finally, and one of the offenders has been sentenced to time in prison. Gordon's working on a book, Being Put Through Hoops, .co.uk, because he's over there in the UK. Mr. Gordon Woods, are you there?
Yes, I am, Ed. How are you today?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thank you so much for coming back, especially finally we got a little good news. By the way, you can find Gordon Woods on Twitter if you look up Gordon Woods Fighting for Justice. So, Mr. Woods, remind the audience, before we get into the whole case of the book, Being Put Through Hoops, and the recent litigation, the criminal case, and I know there's a class action suit out there that you're aware of the details. Can you tell us about yourself? Who is Gordon Woods?
Yeah, Ed, I'm now nearly 69 years old. I think when I first started talking to you, I was 67. I live in a small village in Aberdeenshire in the north of Scotland with my she's now 13-year-old daughter. I've had my daughter on my own as a single father since she was 10 months old. But I just lead a quiet life. I have my own very small graphic design business. And I just lead a quiet existence and just go on with being a father and satisfying any of my clients' needs as best I can.
Must really keep you young, right? Having a 14-year-old kid?
Yeah, but when I had my 13-year-old daughter, when she was born, I was 56.
Yeah.
And certainly at that age, I expected to be a grandfather rather than a father. And of course, with the issues that we had with Brianna's mother, I took control over totally, and I have done ever since. So I don't know if it's kept me young or not, Ed. It's certainly been very, very hard work, that's for sure.
No, I can imagine. My daughter's graduating college in a couple of weeks, 23 years old. And I got to say, for both of us, a grandfather at this point is no rush. We're not looking to be grandpa anytime soon, especially you. Okay. So the background of this. Tell us about the Celtic Boys Club. What was it and what the hell went on over there?
Well, the Celtic Boys Club, to put some sort of importance on it, Celtic is a soccer club in Scotland. They are one of the most successful soccer clubs, not only in Scotland, but in the world. They are world-renowned. They have a worldwide following of many millions of people. They're a huge organisation. And they had just won at the time the Boys Club was started. The Boys Club was started in 1966 by an individual called James Torbett, who approached Celtic and asked them if he could start a boys' club using their name. Now, Jim Torbett had no footballing experience. He'd never played football himself. He'd never managed any club of any consequence. And he was allowed to do so, which we'll maybe cover later, but I find that very suspicious in itself. A few months later, Celtic won the European Cup, which is the most prestigious tournament in Europe for any club tournament. It made them the champions of Europe, shall we say. Now, why a young man, he was 20 or 21 years old, was given the opportunity to start a boys' club for the European champions, it's questionable at least. People must now start to ask questions. Why was Jim Torbett allowed to do it? My view on it, I might be wrong, it will be hopefully decided upon in a court of law very soon. But I think that he was introduced and allowed to start the boys' club because he was a paedophile. And the introduction of Jim Torbett into what they call here the Celtic family was an opening for them, where other paedophiles had previously been involved with Celtic Football Club. It was an opportunity for them to introduce young boys into their organisation.
Yeah, and Gordon, I don't think you're alone in that assessment, because the judge himself declared that Jim Torbett used Celtic Boys Club as an elaborate front to recruit victims.
Yes, and he is not the first judge to say that, by the way. But the judge has only ever said that in criminal law situations. Now, no one has taken Celtic Football Club to criminal law. The only connection at the moment is Celtic are being taken to the Supreme Court in Scotland, the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, with a civil action, a class action, with 25 survivors who have over the years came forward. We expect this class action to be successful, and if it is successful, we are also aware that there are other legal teams who are sitting on the sidelines awaiting the result of this class action. And those other legal teams, other firms of solicitors or lawyers, they have their own victims who will now come forward, and hopefully we'll see an end to this circus that's been ongoing now since 1966, with Celtic denying they had any responsibility, denying that they had anything at all to do with the boys' club. It's a preposterous situation we've arrived in Scotland, but we're going to see this through.
Now, as you said, the crimes took place about 65 years ago, in 1966, 1967. And there were no criminal charges until when? Until 3 years ago?
Yeah. The historic abuse doesn't just go back to 1967 or 66, Ed. The abuse of children actually took place from the mid-60s until the mid-90s. There was 3 decades of abuse. Now, in my trial, in Jim Torbett's recent trial, he stated he had looked after roughly 3,000 boys in the boys' club. That's frightening. If he had access to 3,000 boys in that time, where paedophilia was rife in that club, that's horrific. The first court action did not take place until 1998, when 3 victims came forward and Jim Torbett was charged and appeared in court. He was found guilty and subsequently imprisoned for 2 years. Jim Torbett's next appearance was in 2018, where 6 victims had came forward. And once again, he was found guilty and imprisoned for 6 years. And now, this week, he's been found guilty again with abuse against myself, 4 charges, and he's been given 3 years imprisonment. But the judge made it quite clear, because Jim Torbett is not due for release until November 2024. And the judge made it quite clear that the 3-year sentence he was handing down would only start when his current term concludes. So the 3 years he was sentenced to doesn't start until November 24, and he will be inside until November 27 at least. And I say at least because I fully expect Jim Torbett to face other charges in the very near future. And can also say, Ed, it's not just Jim Torbett. Jim Torbett's one. There has been 7 coaches, managers, treasurers, photographers. There has been 7 employees or individuals associated with Celtic or Celtic Boys Club who have now been convicted. There are 2 further trials this year. One is a gentleman who we spoke about the last time. He was in Vietnam and he had been charged, and he left the country and ran to Vietnam. And I explained to you that we were trying to extradite him, and we had been for many, many years. I can now tell you, Ed, that we found him. We notified the Vietnamese authorities, and the Vietnamese authorities arrested him and returned him to Scotland. He is now in Scotland and faces trial next month.
How old is Jim Torbett today?
Jim Torbett today is 75.
75. Okay, well, good. That's going to be some good hard time to get out. If he's getting out at 27, I do the math on that. That would be 79. He'd be getting out of prison.
We are very much, as a group of survivors, we are very much looking to ensure that Mr. Torbett does not see the outside of a prison cell for the rest of his life. As I stated quite clearly in the newspaper statements that I made after the verdict, it is my intention to ensure that Mr. Jim Torbett dies in prison.
Yeah. Yeah, because even though, 75, that's pretty much a death sentence. You're going to prison 75 years old. You got another 7 years to go.
Can I also tell you, Ed, that Jim Torbett's youngest victim, was 5 years old.
Wow.
Now, there is no way that man should be allowed out on the streets of anywhere, any country in the world, because he is a danger to children.
Yeah. Now, again, though, these sentences are rather small: 2 years, 6 years, and 3 years. Of course, it's after the 6 years are filled. But these are all still very, very low sentences, even for the United States. In the United States, the average sentence for a child rape is 3.5 years served on an 8-year sentence. That's the average. So all these people talking about death penalties and stuff like that, these guys are getting on 3.5 years. You got to deal with that first before you start talking about death penalties and things. But now, are these kind of sentences common in Scotland?
Historically, they have been.
Wow.
That's another area that we are trying to approach, and another area that I'm campaigning for. In Scotland, I have stated many times, it's a paedophile's playground.
Yeah.
It's paradise for paedophiles because they get away with so much, and even if they're caught, the sentences are so small. We have one individual, a gentleman called Neil Strachan, who Celtic employed to open a different Celtic Boys Club. It was called Celtic Boys Club East. At the time he was appointed by Celtic Football Club, he already had a conviction for child abuse.
Wow.
So Celtic employed a known abuser of children. Neil Strachan was then operated within Celtic Boys Club East for several years. But he was within the last sort of 3 or 4 years convicted of horrific child abuse. And he has been sentenced, and this is how bad his charges were. He's been sentenced now to life imprisonment.
Now, Gordon Woods, here in the United States, we have a system where if someone's applying for a job at a school or a daycare, there's a basic background check that's run to see if they have any kind of felony convictions or especially if they have any kind of child sex abuse convictions. Do you have that same kind of system over there in Scotland?
Yes, we have. We have a system called Disclosure Scotland.
Okay.
But it's not. It doesn't go back to '66 or whatever. I think it's a relatively recent thing. Maybe the last 10 or 20 years it's been in place. And funnily enough, my 13-year-old was involved last year with a theatre group, and I used to go and work behind the scenes and sort of be there when she was there and help out as best I can. And I had to go through the Disclosure Scotland. I had to go through it. They had to look into my past because I was working with the children at the theatre group.
Sure.
So, yeah, it is in place now. But for literally thousands of children, it's too late.
I hear you. Now, I've done a lot of shows, too, in Ireland, the Kinkera School for Boys. And whenever I hear your story, Gordon, I always think of that story. And there was another school, too, over in the UK. I forget, I think it was a Soborn school or something like that. Sabine school. Oh, what was that called?
Sherborne Academy.
There you go, Sherborne Academy. Right. I think you might have been able to put me in touch with that woman.
Yes, I can. I have her. Yes, I can.
I believe you did already. I think I interviewed her, and I know I've interviewed her, the woman that's on that crusade, and I believe it might have been you who put me in touch with her. But my question is, and especially in Kinkera in Ireland, there was a lot of blackmail and intelligence agencies using these facilities for blackmail purposes. Do you think anything like that could have gone on over there at the Celtic Boys Club in Scotland?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of, Ed. You see, the thing is, though, Ed, when I left, when I was asked to leave the Celtic Boys Club in 1967, excuse me, by Jim Torbett,
yeah,
I made a distinct point of not reading about, listening to. I didn't even watch football for nearly 30 years. I ran away from home when I was 14 and a half years of age. And for the first year after the abuse ended, I ran away from home and I travelled Europe and over to America and Canada. So even when, my late teens and my early 20s when I got married, I made a point of not thinking about what had happened. I tried to put it into the back of my mind. So if there had been any issues along the lines you're talking about, I wouldn't have known about them anyway.
Mm. Yeah, it is amazing how many people, because when you've been through this kind of traumatic situation, you just want to run. You don't want to look back. And there's very few that can do it, Gordon. There's very few like yourself that would make this much of an effort to have this case reopened all these years later. Man, I got to tell you.
Well, one of the reasons I did it, Ed, was I'm now 68 years of age, and a few years ago I was diagnosed with stage 4 COPD, which is a lung condition. And basically there's nothing they can do to cure the situation. They can relieve it, they can make me feel better, but they can't cure it. And of course, it set me thinking 3 or 4 years ago, in all honesty, my thought process was, I don't have a lot of time left. And if I wanted to come forward as a survivor, as I've done many, many times, Ed, over the years, there's many times I've wanted to come forward and I've talked myself out of it. And I said to myself, if I don't come forward now, I might never have another chance to do so. And that's one of the reasons I came forward when I did.
And also, too, I'm sure that watching you come forward has encouraged these fellows with this class action suit also to pursue justice in the civil case as well. What can you tell us about that? What do you know about that, first of all? Do you know anything about it?
I don't know a great deal about it. I just know that the class action is a relatively new law that has been brought into the Scottish statute books. Now, I do believe that this class action against Celtic is the very first to ever go through the Supreme Court in Scotland. Now, because of that, and because of the judges having to make sure that they do everything correct and everything by the book, because they have no precedent. They're looking at something that's brand new. And this has taken some time. It's been going on now for a couple of years. There's been so many preliminary hearings on it. But I believe that on October the 25th of this year is when the judges will actually sit down and listen to the evidence and come to a conclusion as to whether Celtic were responsible or if they were not. And that's basically just what it hangs on, because if Celtic were responsible, then the individuals who are processing the class action against Celtic, I would hope, would be entitled to substantial compensation.
Yeah, I would hope so. You know, the way that class action lawsuits have turned out, and what they've become, what they've evolved to here in the States, is the lawyers get a big chunk of that money and the plaintiffs split up a very small portion. So I hope over there in Scotland that you guys are more to what the intention of that law is, and the ability to sue as a class action. Now, Gordon, tell us about because you mustered up the courage to come back and speak up, and then finally this thing went to court. You had to testify in court, right?
Yes, I testified over 2 days, Ed. It was probably two of the most difficult days in my life. I went to the court, which was held. The trial was held 100 miles from where I live, and I stayed in a hotel for a few nights. And I thought I had fully prepared myself for trial, and I was very confident going into the trial. But naively, I'd never been involved in a court scenario in my life before, and I was quite shocked as to some of the things that happen in a courtroom. One of the things I would say is the very first thing that I did when I was asked to go in and give testimony, the prosecution had told me that there's a screen put up in the courtroom, so I cannot see Jim Torbett. He can see me because he has a screen in front of him and there's a camera on me. So Jim Torbett can see me giving evidence, but I can't see him. And I immediately asked for that screen to be removed, which they actually advised not to. But I asked for the screen to be removed, and the prosecution advocate, King's Counsel, asked me why I wanted it moved. And I said, because I do not want Jim Torbett to think for 1 second that he has any power over me now. I said, this is my time to speak. I have the power. and I want to look Jim Torbett in the face when I give my testimony. And the screen was removed.
Is there any possibility that he can use that? What is the appellate process over there in Scotland? Is it possible he can appeal this case and say, "Oh, I didn't get a fair trial. They took down the screen. I'm supposed to have the screen up," and things like that?
Not for that reason, but there may be other reasons he can appeal.
Yeah.
Let me give you an indication. There was 15 jurors, Ed. And of those 15 jurors, they had to consider 4 charges. Now, when the verdicts came, there was 0 jury voted not proven. 0 jurors voted not guilty. 60 jurors voted guilty. So there's not really a great deal of room for an appeal there, Ed.
Gotcha.
Because 60 people at one point said he's guilty of that charge. Because in Scotland, I believe that with there being the 15 jurors, 8 have to find him guilty for a conviction. And that's called a majority verdict. But we didn't have a majority verdict. We had a unanimous verdict on all charges.
You know, it's fascinating that what we consider justice in one country is different in another country, you know? Like you'd think we'd be, after all this time, you know, we'd be able to like more streamline this thing and have a more equitable justice in different countries. Now, but you mentioned to me before that you were on the stand for 2 days. Now, this whole thing just happened. This case just ended. This verdict came in on the 26th. This is all fresh.
Yeah.
How long ago were you when you were on the stand?
Sorry, how long?
Yeah, like if the verdict came in on the 26th, what were the 2 days you were sitting on the stand? Like, what date was that?
Oh, I was on the stand on the. Let me get this right. The trial started on the 18th, and I was on the stand on the 19th and the 20th. I then had a 5-day wait for the verdict.
Right, so this is all very, very fresh.
Yeah. I mean, the verdict only came in last Tuesday of last week.
And I think I heard from you the same night, man. I really appreciate that, Gordon. You know, I really appreciate you keeping me in the loop here over the years. I really appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So now you must be pretty shook up then, right?
Well, I was, because I can't say too much, but I got a phone call on the Friday. The trial ended on the Friday night, or the late Friday afternoon, and the jury was sent out, and the trial was scheduled to recommence on the Monday, where the prosecution advocate and the defence advocate would give their summing up to the jury. The judge would then give them his directions, and they would retire to consider the verdict. This was on the Monday. I received a call on a Friday night from an individual who I can't name because I don't want to get the lad into trouble, but he had told me of a circumstance that had arisen in the court on the Thursday, which was the morning, the second day I was giving evidence in the morning. And he had told me that the defence lawyers had tried to collapse the case because on the Wednesday afternoon, when I gave evidence, I had lied in court. Excuse me, Ed. I was accused of lying in court and that I was an unreliable witness. Now, I was to take the stand at 10 o'clock, and at 9:45 I was told there was a delay. It would be about 10:30. And then at 10:30 I was told further delay would be 11 o'clock. I eventually took the stand at 11:45, and there had been over an hour and a half of legal argument over whether I had lied under oath the day before. Now, this was eventually thrown out, and the judge ordered that the trial proceed. Now, the confusion over whether I had lied or not was with regard to one particular question I was asked. And it was a yes or a no question, Ed. I had to answer yes or no. I answered the question no. If I had answered yes, he could still have put forward that I had lied in court. It was a question that was compiled in such a way, it didn't matter how I answered it, I was going to be called a liar. Now, I'm quite sure the judge saw through that, and that's why he said the trial was to proceed. But I was so naive going into a courtroom, I didn't expect that a defence counsel could do that they could deliberately entrap a witness in that way. I have since spoken to my legal team, and they've said, yes, it's allowed. The defence counsel isn't under oath. He's not under oath. When he's questioning you, you're under oath. But he's not, so he can say anything he wants. And I found that out as the trial progressed, that 3 or 4 times the defence counsel stated as an untruth. It was something that just wasn't true. And on 2 occasions I was able to correct him and show the jury what he'd done. I was able to correct him and show him that what I had said was correct. Twice I wasn't able to because I said to defence counsel, can I expand on my answer? And both times I was rejected. And I felt that I was just astounded that as a witness I wasn't allowed to give a full explanation of what I perceived that question to be and how it should be answered. But once again, I think that 15 members of the public who were jurors that day saw through what he was trying to do.
And you described to me off the air that there was other mistreatment of you when you were on the stand. What else would you want to tell us?
Well, that's basically what it was.
Yeah.
It was if he was saying to the jury that I had said a certain thing in my statement to the police, and I corrected. I said, no, that is not what I said. And he was quite adamant. Mr. Moores, I've got your statement that you gave Police Scotland in February 2020 in front of me. He said, you definitely said that. And I turned to the usher who was in the court and I said, may I see a copy of the statement? And the judge authorised that I could see a copy of the statement and told me what page to turn to. And I found the part of my statement that I had given to the police, and it was totally different from what he had just said. But what it does do, Ed, it puts the witness under the most horrific pressure, because he's got the right to tell people what I told the police in court. Sorry, when I told the police when I first gave my evidence to them, when I first made the complaint. But he can twist that and actually state an untruth.
Well, let me ask you a question, Gordon, because here in the States, right, let's say it's a civil trial, and I'm the plaintiff and I'm a witness. The defense will be able to ask me questions and maybe try and twist my words, and if I keep short answers, then my attorney will then get a chance to question me, and then he'll bring out the truth in his questioning. Is that how it works over there?
It is.
Yeah.
After the cross-examination, my defence attorney has the opportunity to cover anything which she feels was untoward in the testimony. However, I was actually, I'll be honest with you, Ed, regardless of how strong I can be or how confident I am, I froze on that witness box.
Sure.
I absolutely froze, and when my attorney, my King's Counsel, stood up and questioned me again on some issues, she didn't cover the areas that I wanted her to cover. And when she eventually said, I have no more questions, Your Lord, and the judge turned to me and said, Mr. Wood, you can leave the stand, I was astonished. I thought, why didn't she ask me about that? As it transpires, and with the verdict, I think she knew exactly what she was doing. I think she knew if she questioned me on it, it may pose its own problems. And I think she possibly knew that the jury would see through what the defence counsel had tried to do. But when I left the court, I just felt I'd really let myself down, Ed. I felt I've fought for this for 3.5 years. You know, I've had my opportunity. I spoke as well as I could in the court. I honestly felt I'd really let myself down. And when I heard about the delay on the Thursday with regards to the legal arguments, I 100% expected not guilty verdicts on a Tuesday morning. And I had the most horrific weekend. I hardly slept over the weekend. I was so disappointed in myself that I felt I had let myself down totally. And I'll be honest, I was absolutely distraught for 4 days. And when the result came through on the Tuesday and I was phoned by a reporter, literally minutes after the verdict was handed down, and he told me it was guilty on all 4 counts, I just absolutely collapsed.
Yeah,
I was emotional. I just collapsed. And fortunately, I had someone in the house with me at the time who was able to make sure I was okay. But that came as such a shock to me. And I don't know what else I can say to anybody other than, regardless of what happens in the court, put your faith in those 15 people in the jury. These people aren't as stupid as you may think they are. These 15 people could see exactly what that defence attorney tried to do.
Very, very true. And I can only imagine what this was like, because like you said, to begin with, the circumstances of the charges are just so traumatic. You reliving all of that, and you've never testified before, but I can just only imagine what you went through. It's such, and then you think, oh my goodness, did I just mess this up? I can only imagine what you went through there. Now, what about other witnesses? Who else did the state call to prove their case?
Well, do you know something? I don't know, Ed, because I'm not told, and the only thing that I knew was happening was when I was with the boys' club, I knew another young lad there. I can't mention his name, obviously, but I knew the other young lad. And I mentioned this well, he's a gentleman now, but I mentioned this young lad's name to the police because the night that Jim Torbett told me not to come back to the club, he was in the front seat of Jim Torbett's car. And then in 1998, I discovered when I spoke to my mother about the Jim Torbett being charged, his name came up. He was one of the complainants. So he had been abused. Now, to me, it seemed that Jim Torbett had thrown me out the club. He had already lined up my replacement to attack. And that gentleman, fortunately, gave evidence to the court that he knew me, he knew of me at the club, and what had happened to him. Now, in Scotland, we've got a legal doctrine that if there is no collaboration, because obviously people who abuse children or any sex offender, they don't do it with an audience. So there is no collaboration. But there is a legal doctrine in Scots law that if you can prove a similar case and that can be seen in court, then that can be sufficient for collaboration. Now, this person gave evidence in court on my behalf which showed that there was 10 similarities with his abuse and my abuse. There was 10 similarities, and that was enough. But without his evidence, without that very brave individual coming forward and reliving it again, he He went over all his abuse in 1998, and he did it again for me in 2023. But without his evidence, we would never have got a guilty verdict. Now, that's the only other witness I know. I can imagine who the others were. There's doctors who gave evidence in previous cases as to why abuse victims take so long to come forward, and there are many, many different witnesses. I mean, the trial actually lasted 5 full days. The trial started on the Monday morning and it came to a conclusion on Friday at 4 p.m. So it was 5 full days of listening to evidence.
Yeah, and people should know too that Gordon Woods contacted me. When this first case was opened, I guess here we would call the indictment here in the United States. But over there in Scotland, you're not allowed to talk about this. You can't name who the defendant is, and you can't, right? You can't talk about it.
You can until as soon as they're charged, until he is or the offender is charged. You cannot mention his name after he has been charged.
Amazing. Yeah, it's totally different.
But
yeah.
There was a period of 2 years between me coming forward and Jim Torbett being charged. And I took advantage of that 2 years to shout his name from the rooftops. Mm-hmm. I did television documentaries. I did television news reports. I was interviewed on television and in the press, and I made quite clear, very, very loudly, that Jim Torbett was my abuser. But the moment he was charged, I was not able to then issue that. All I could say was my abuser at Celtic Boys Club. But there we go. I mean, obviously with these previous convictions anyway, everybody, plus things like my Twitter account, my Facebook account, my website, the book, it all mentioned Jim Torbett. So when he's charged, you don't have to go back and remove all evidence of when you said Jim Torbett.
Gotcha.
It's from the moment he's charged until the jury reaches a verdict. You cannot publicly, the same as the press can't publicly name me. I mean, in all the press reports and all the newspapers in Scotland cover the trial every day, and they could only state that victim A. I was victim A. That's how I was described in all the press reports. As soon as the verdicts hand down, victim A became Gordon Woods.
Yeah, and people actually go to jail. They get arrested for that over there if they reveal these names.
Yes, it's contempt of court.
Yeah, it's just a whole amazing. It's just so different in so many different ways. Now, if Mr. Jim Torbett was in charge of 3,000 young boys, have other survivors, since all this has been hitting the news and convictions, are other survivors coming forward every day?
Well, as far as I'm aware, I can't state categorically, but from what I've been led to believe, when I came forward in 2019, and I had a front page on various newspapers. It was front page, and then the class action started about 18 months after I came forward. I was led to believe that after I came forward and did the television reports, that another 12 victims came forward. Now, I am hoping upon hope that with me getting the guilty verdict last week, that will encourage many, many more people to come forward. Because as I said earlier, Ed, I'm 68 years of age. I might not have a long time left on this planet, I don't know. But there are people out there in their late 30s and their 40s and their 50s who possibly were suffering the same as me over the years. Now, these are people who have still got 30, 40, 50 years left to live, and I encourage them to come forward and lay this to bed and clear their mind, and because these paedophiles, for their whole life, they're victims feel that they have no power. The power's been taken from them. And that's why I said that when I removed that screen, I took the power back. As soon as that screen was removed and I could look at Torbett in the eyes as I gave his evidence, eye to eye, he had no power left. I had the power. I was in control. And that was such a satisfying feeling that for all those years, for 5 decades, he had the power over me to keep my mouth shut. And now he's lost all that power.
I know also, too, that this Jim Torbett was involved in allegations in Kearney, New Jersey. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there's one individual who came forward in my trial, and I was unaware of this until he spoke at my trial, that he alleges that he was abused in Kearney, New Jersey. Now, there are others who were abused in Kearney, New Jersey, and I followed that a little bit recently. I wasn't aware that the particular person who gave evidence in my trial was involved in that. As we spoke the last time, the BBC here did a documentary on Jim Torbett and the abuse at Celtic Boys Club. And that was aired in the United Kingdom. And at the time it was aired, Jim Torbett was living in California. And within 24 hours of the BBC airing the documentary about Jim Torbett, Homeland Security in America visited Mr. Torbett and put him in the back of a patrol car, took him to the airport and sent him back to Scotland, where he was arrested. The minute his feet touched the ground in Scotland, he was arrested. But no criminal charges have ever been brought in America. And I feel that they should be.
Well, definitely, if there's any survivors out there in Kearney, New Jersey, want to get a hold of me, I can help you with your case. Let me ask a question real quick, because I noticed some comments on your Twitter. If you go to Gordon Woods Fighting for Justice on Twitter, and once again, the book is going to be called Being Put Through Hoops.co.uk. You can go to that website and check out the first descriptions of the book. But people are claiming that other soccer clubs are complaining about this, saying that what is that whole controversy?
Well, there are, Ed, and I'll tell you something right now. Any football supporter, and I've said this before in another interview, any football supporter gloating over what's happening at Celtic and wringing their hands with glee at what happens at Celtic, don't rub your hands too long, because we're coming after them as well. Because other football clubs like Rangers, Partick Thistle, Motherwell, Dundee United, they've all had allegations made against them. However, there is a major difference here, Ed, and that is that all of these other clubs, it is alleged that they had a paedophile operating within their club. A paedophile. Now, it's easy for one paedophile to infiltrate into the club. But as long as when that club discovers who that individual is, removes him from the club, and blackens his name in such a way that he never gets involved with another football club, soccer club, as a youth leader. One paedophile in these clubs. Celtic so far have had 7 convictions. There is 2 live cases where one trial is taking place next month, and the other trial, I think, is September. And these are criminal trials against individuals from Celtic Boys Club. Now, if they're convicted, that will be nine paedophiles from the one soccer club. That is not infiltration. That's a paedophile ring. That's a paedophile ring that, as far as I'm concerned, the parent club Celtic Football Club knew was in operation and covered it up and made sure that their priority was to keep the name of Celtic Football Club clean at all times. And they allowed children, young boys, to go through what they have done just to keep the name of Celtic Football Club clean.
Yeah, you can only imagine if they got 7 convictions in this case, or was it 8? Was it 7 or 8?
7. Up until now, there's 7. There's 2 more live cases.
Yeah.
There were another 2, which would take it up to 11. There was another 2. However, one of those that were charged and was awaiting trial died last year, and another was considered by the court to be unfit to face trial due to dementia. So those 2 got away with it as far as I'm concerned. But there's been 7 convicted, 2 awaiting trial, and 2 that never saw the inside of a courtroom.
There's 11 people we know about with legitimate concerns. This was a systemic haven for this type of activity, and we can only imagine that's just in the institution. When people went there to get paid and get a job, you can imagine their friends and their relatives, who else around these people are involved in this kind of activity right now. And I would hope that there's some kind of scrutiny on all of them.
Can I say something though, because this is important?
Yeah.
Excuse me. In the 70 years that Celtic Boys Club was actually in existence, there was probably dozens and dozens and dozens of individuals went through Celtic Boys Club as coaches. Mm-hmm. Not all of them are paedophiles. The vast majority of the coaches that were involved with Celtic Boys Club were law-abiding individuals who only had the best interest for the kids that were going through the club. But when you have the scenario has arisen now, any coach that was involved with Celtic Boys Club is now being blackened and being tarred with the same brush.
Yeah.
Please don't do that, because there were a lot of people at Celtic Boys Club and a lot of boys at Celtic Boys Club. There was probably hundreds upon hundreds of boys went through Celtic Boys Club who were not abused. I was one of the unlucky ones.
Yeah, gotcha, Gordon. We have to keep that in mind too as well. But we are out of time. Gordon Woods, I can't think. Go ahead. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, Gordon, especially so quickly after going through all this. The book is being called Being Put Through Hoops. .co.uk. We're talking about the Celtic Boys Club, and if you look up on Twitter, Gordon Woods, Fighting for Justice. Gordon, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Good night.